Now let's move to Maruti. Quite a horrid incident took place recently, and you've seen an HR manager being literally killed, which is it's an incident that can actually shake the corporate world and manufacturing sector. What sort of social and economic malaise do you see this incident reflect?
See that a bigger problem is really manufacturing, right? India has done pretty badly in manufacturing, and there are a variety of reasons for these. Some of these have to do with infrastructure-related issues. But I think if you look at car companies, because making a car is supposed to be the let's say the epitome of any kind of manufacturing, right? Because there are so many parts and assemblies and sub-assemblies that come together in creating a car. And it has a cascading effect on so many other industries. Power, for instance, or steel. A lot of steel goes into making cars, or aluminum. The interesting thing is the manufacturing sector has sort of been relegated to the fringes of the mainstream economy, right? You have large companies which are producing steel, which are making cars and all that, but they're still on the fringes. It's the service economy which is driving the Indian economic engine. If you look at contribution to GDP, manufacturing's contribution has been steadily shrinking. I think what's happened because of this is the focus of most politically affiliated trade unions has probably moved away from large manufacturing companies. Also because many of these large trade unions are affiliated to political parties, and many of these political parties rule various states. And if you look at states, the big change in India is that over the last 20 years, chief ministers have essentially become salesmen of their states. You know, they want large companies to come and set up base in their states, and they want to convince them that there are no labor problems, as they call them, whatsoever in their states. So I think this movement has got a little marginalized, and as a result, I think there is no leadership, there is no guidance. That's on one side. On the other side, you have the fact that all manufacturing companies have been under pressure till early this year from rising commodity prices, which are now going down, but input costs was going up for most of them. Competition was intense in car manufacturing. As a result, these companies had to be fairly tight with their wages and fairly stringent with their quality and efficiency requirements from their workers. You put all these together, it doesn't really add up into a happy picture. And to compound all this is the fact that these people are producing cars which are in many ways, although you have fairly inexpensive cars available now, any car is a luxury product for the average Indian, right? Because the average Indian in a country with 200 million poor people, any car is a luxury product, right? I know people would think that a D-class car, as they call it, is a luxury product, but I think any car is a luxury product for most Indians. And they work in Gurgaon, which has got these fancy glass and chrome high-rise buildings, malls and multiplexes, and people zipping around in their SUVs. There is bound to be some feeling of envy, some feeling of resentment that is there in these workers. And I think everything just sort of came together, and tinderbox-like situation. And as it happens with most tinderboxes, there was a conflagration.
So, I mean, I know that you've explained as to why this entire issue came up, and the problem is well identified. But looking at the solutions, they're talking about wages, they're talking about temporary workers and poor working conditions. Now, temporary workers, even though it has been a big issue, it has continued to remain, companies have been continuing to employ temporary workers because it suits their revenue model, suits their labor wage model. How should we resolve this issue?
Well, temporary workers, I think, are used because Indian labor laws are very stringent, right? So if you hire a permanent worker and you're a manufacturing company, you can't let that person go very easily. It's a laborious process. It's quite literally a headache. So most companies don't want to do that, which is why they end up hiring temporary workers. Now, in ideal circumstances, a temporary worker should be used to manage spikes in demand. They shouldn't be asked to do routine work. But if you look at the ratio for most companies, it emerges that most Indian car companies have 3 temporary workers at least for every permanent worker. They clearly were using these people for a lot more than that, and some of these people were actually doing the work that so-called regular or permanent employees were to do, which is really not on, right? So on one side, you need labor laws to be reformed. Now this is one of those things. It's one of those big macro statements, and it's probably the first thing anyone outside the country or even within the country will tell you when they ask you what kind of reforms do you expect. Everyone wants labor reforms, but it needs to happen. Very politically sensitive thing. You need to do that. Second thing, I just believe that in any market of this kind, in any free market, you have to pay people what they're worth, right? And your profits cannot be coming at the cost of your employees, right? It's not. I'm not advocating a return to the socialistic model. I'm a big believer in free markets, but free markets doesn't mean profiteering at the cost of your employees.
Okay, so what you're suggesting is you need to have a more fair way of working, better conditions, and also while you're using temporary employees, please follow the code of
That's right.
employment.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, given the timeliness of this occasion, I'm also, impelled to ask you about the presidential elections. And Pranab Mukherjee was obviously sworn as the 13th president. Now, given the fact that his career has been so strongly embedded in politics, and he's now taking up a seat as a constitutional head, how do you view this presidentship of Pranab Mukherjee?
It'll be interesting, right? I'm quite honestly, I'm hoping it generates a lot of headlines, right? More than anything else, and I think it will. I don't think Pranab Mukherjee will disappoint us, and I think the reason is the constitution of which he is supposed to be one of India's foremost constitutional scholars, or at least someone who knows the constitution very well, does provide for a lot of leeway for the president in terms of disagreeing with the government, in terms of getting the government to reconsider decisions and things like that. And my belief is that you will probably see a lot of that coming into play over the next few years. I do not think he's going to be one of these quiet presidents like Pratibha Patil, the previous president, was. She was a non-controversial as far as the political establishment and the running of government was concerned. There were controversies related to other things, but I don't think his tenure is going to be like that. I think his tenure is likely to see a lot more active presidency than we've seen in India in the past.
Thanks a lot, Sukumar, for your views on these issues. I hope you found this episode useful and it brought clarity on many issues of this week. Thanks a lot for watching. Stay tuned.